Hello, everyone. It's Martha Novak, who ran to the bathroom to get tissues because cold weather makes my nose run. So, what a way to start a show, huh? Anyway, dears, I'm here and I'm live. And the guest call in number today, if you want to talk to me directly, is 347 850 1647. Keep in mind, what we do here is um, we are delighted to pick things up for you, but we are teaching consciousness and enlightenment. We are talking about how to be more vulnerable. And we're going through all the steps because this isn't like a light switch. We don't just turn on being vulnerable. We have to get straight first within us. Studied in this series. And if you're interested in the series, please go back and listen to our archive shows, Talk Radio, YouTube. And I think they're very helpful for you to start analyze the part, the whole, you know? So we have been studying vulnerability and being more vulnerable. Hi, Lisa. Good morning to you too, my dear. We've been studying vulnerability in its parts, like blame and what comes out of blame. If self-blame is shame, and we have studied forgiveness. Michelle, good morning to you too, my darling. We're working through kind of a series of things that I'm really put in perspective, I hope, for you today at one point in our show. We worked on self-forgiveness last today, and we're then going to go into a talk on self-acceptance. So I love the fact that you all listen to this show and that you write to me. I'm thrilled to get your notes. And if you want to call in, again, we're at 347-850 forgiveness for you. And then we're back. Great. And then we're going to go back into our new quick prayer. You guys that Facebook Live keeps going down because slow speed. You didn't hear me say that, but have ready on your computer to go to Blog Talk Radio so you won't miss any of the lesson today if it goes down again. You know, we have the fastest speed there is, which is pretty pitiful. So we just can't help it. We get the fastest speed we can. All right. Dear God, thank you so much for bringing us all together today as friends that don't know each other, sometimes as friends that do. We thank you so much to be on to know more about consciousness, about ourselves, about you, dear God, because it's all one thing. None of us were left behind the door and left out of what you have instilled in us as human beings. And we are on some sort of journey, some sort of path, and we are very honored to be so. Even if we don't like our lives or anything, for it is the you, we're back, it is the you through us and through all things that know it all, dear God. And we surrender to that information to us today that we'll intrinsically know if we open our hearts and minds. And so it is. Amen. So the rest of the self-forgiveness lesson, I wanted to mention to you, and I may say this again, that when we're talking about being more vulnerable, we really are talking about being very comfortable as who we are in our lives authentically. This is a journey. Now, you've had me talk about, you've heard me say that there is a triad that we become more conscious through. Awareness to consciousness to enlightenment. Awareness to consciousness to enlightenment. Breaking that down still further, to be comfortable as our authentic selves, in our authentic selves, we must be Now, the ego child's mind hears the word vulnerability and goes, "Yikes!" And the higher mind realizes, no, this is actually a marvelous privilege to be so comfortable with ourselves that we can stand in our vulnerability and say, "Look, I'm just human. It's okay, and life is good." Um, this is a breakdown, another kind of breakdown to talk about consciousness. So I want to put this on the table, whether we're talking about being more vulnerable, or whether we're talking about your healing in general, or whether psychological healing, or whether we're talking about growing as a human being in more consciousness. There's a bit of a continuum that says we must face our blame. We have to look at it, see if it's valid. If it's not, do something about that, because the blame of self often goes into a real shame of ourselves. It's where we have crossed this pathological line, right? We say, not just I have done this that I'm ashamed of. We say, I am bad, bad, bad because I have done this and other things. And it is a self-attack, right? So we've had to look at that, former radio shows. We then need to go into some sort of self-forgiveness that we are coming out of right now as we talk. And we need to go into then a self-acceptance. We're going to talk about that today. Then that leads to passion. That leads to being aware of what you're doing in an extremely mindful way in the moment. It is all about the literal moment, not repeating the past, not thinking the old thoughts, but experiencing the new ones. This becomes, when this takes root, a certain wisdom. We look at this and we go, how can this be of service to humanity? How can this way we go about seeing what we can do to add value? And then there's a next stage, which is the implementation of that service in some way. A lot of times we have some real creative ideas here of how to add to the community. Then that becomes a certain fulfillment within us. We're becoming more and more keen on fulfilling our potential as human beings. That becomes a real, when it deepens, a real self of true authenticity. Now, that's a breakdown, and we'll talk about it again. So if you didn't get all that, that's just fine. We'll give that to you again. But this is the journey you're on. It's a very exciting journey. It's a very creative journey. It's yours and yours alone. Our lessons are formed not just from our successes, but from our mistakes, which, if we learn from them, are not mistakes at all. There is absolutely nothing we find as we go through this continuum, this progression that I was telling you about. Regret. Your regrets are a fixation of energy back in blame and shame. And we certainly want you to listen to those shows, take them to heart, and realize, you did the best you could with what the information was at the time and your awareness level at the time, and now you know more. What all of this does, of course, is it takes you out of reactive energy, which you're in as a child. We react to when we're in our child's mind, and we don't have clear and definitive choices based on wonderful options that are here for us. So I think it's extremely important that we now look at this as the aware minds that out of my past, out of being afraid, out of avoiding. I'm going to deliberately choose because there are a lot of options to choose from, but only in the higher mind, right? Okay, so here we go. Finishing our our discussion on self-forgiveness last week. Self-forgiveness is really important because it breaks the hold that the past has on you. The past has a hold on you. You don't even realize that, of course, because what we're doing is reacting automatically based on how we reacted when we were kids. We're following a pre-established script that is in our fear-based minds. Your child. Now, what happens to our options as adults? Our options as adults. I've got a story about this. And somewhere in my past, I've told this story before, so it may be familiar to you. But I had a client years ago. She was a woman, but she was in a very man-oriented business. Let me tell you, there are not many women still in this particular business. She was very good at what she did, and she had a wonderful reputation as someone who could really deliver. Now, she was on the top of her game when she had the idea for a contract. Great big company. It was huge. She couldn't get much larger than this. And she, for some reason, I don't know how exactly this happened. I don't remember because this was several years ago. But there was another company involved that did certain things that she didn't particularly want to do but could do. And so she partnered with this company, and they presented to this huge company, and they accepted them coming in and doing this as vendors. All right. Problem was, she, not knowing this other company that she was partnering with. Good morning, Kat. Yes, I'm glad to see you too. And I'm so sorry that the broadcast is being interrupted by Facebook Live. Please, if you are interrupted, do go to Blog Talk Radio. And thank you for letting me know, Michelle. We're having trouble. Don't ask me why. All of a sudden, we're having trouble today. Maybe it's the really cold weather we're experiencing where we are, but we're having trouble with speed today. So sometimes it just goes down. If you don't want to lose any of this broadcast, please go to radio.com. Real Talk with Martha Novak. What you can do, though, to enter the live broadcast is to go to my website, marthanovak.com, and you'll go under radio shows, and you'll see two buttons. One enters the live Facebook feed, and one in radio feed. If you'll hit Blog Talk Radio, you'll come right into this radio show. All right. So going back to the story about this young woman, she was not watching this other company. She assumed, she trusted that they were a good company. Guess what? They weren't. They let her down terribly. They messed up so much you would not believe. They messed us up so much that because she was linked with them, this huge company canceled their contract with her. The next thing she heard was that the CEO was really bad-mouthing her. So she came to her session with me, and she was so upset. You can imagine. She was so, she said, my career is over. This is just, my reputation is completely ruined from this terrible decision on my part. She didn't watch them. She trusted the wrong people. Okay, right? Well, she got all that out in her session, and I said, really, I would not slink into my hole like you were doing. Again, the child does, right? You slink into your hole because you've been hurt. You did something wrong, so let's hide, right? And avoid and try to, get over this terrible blow. That's what children do. So I said, let's do something else. I said, let's write him a note, and let's send him the biggest gift basket you can find with this note. And she looked at me like I had struck her across the face, and I said, absolutely. Now let's write a note, though, not from the obsequious child's mind that just is, so humble and horrible, but let's write one from the highest self. So I dictated something to her, and it was to this end of, dear whatever, I wanted to thank you for the hardest lesson I've ever learned in my life. I am so sorry that our project ended the way it did. I had no idea that it was, I could not imagine a worse scenario, and I can only imagine how you feel. However, I want you to know that it was the most profound lesson in my life. I have learned to be on top of everything from now on, and anyone that I work with in the future is going to have the benefit of the lessons I've learned from you. And I want to thank you with all my heart and wish you the best for future times. This is something, I'm going off the top of my head right now, but it was something like that we wrote. Well, he called her immediately, and he said, I can't believe what you've just done, what you've just said to me, and we want you. We want to work with you. Now, that scenario can't happen in the egoic child's mind. It can't even happen if you are you sending that gift basket and this note to manipulate the other person, because believe it or not, we feel that energy. I know when somebody is pulling my leg, and most people do. But she was sincere. We had gotten her to the place where she could sincerely write that note, sincerely offer that gift basket with no thought to herself, just saying what was true when she came out of the drama of it all, that I have learned and I will apply these things to the future. And any smart CEO is going to say, hey, don't apply those to other companies. Let's do it for us. And she went on to have an extremely happy relationship with him that probably is still going. Now, those options don't exist in the ego child's mind. Those options, those choices for you exist in the advanced mind, in the higher mind. You see? You have two parts. Those of you that are listening that are new to me, there are two parts to you. There's the ego child's mind, the part of you that reacts like a child, and the part of you that's still following the child's script. And there's the higher self mind, which is the mind that is love-based, that thinks of the other person as well as yourself and tries to find a win-win scenario all the way. It is someone that participates in the abundance of God and not the lack of things. You know, the thing that confuses us about God is everything. God is the lack in the ego child's mind that the ego child's mind actually believes in, and it's the abundance and the fullness that is the higher mind. If you are in the ego child's mind script, you are reacting to things in your past, just as that story did. She was reacting. Her child's mind told her to run and hide. It's a reaction. It's not a choice. Do you understand? A reaction is the only thing you're capable of in the ego child's mind. What you've always done. And what you established when you were a little tiny child. Only in the higher mind, only in that love experience of self that is God, to, by the way, the lack or the fullness, do you have the choices and the creativity to extend yourself in that way, and often with great results. You cannot pretend to be that. Pardon me, if you are the other. Excuse me. Nose is draining and choking me. Pardon me. Okay. So, self-forgiveness breaks this hold that the past has on you. When bad things happened, you did certain things. Bad things, all right? You crossed the line somewhere, and it wasn't just a bad thing that happened. You were the bad thing. That's the pathology of all this. That's a pathology of shame, right? Starts out with blame of self. Blame is just really about the circumstances and goes into the I am bad. I am terrible because I did this. That's a sad thing. And we've got to come out of it now and forgive ourselves because everybody in the world has done something bad. We all do various bad things. There's some things that we all have in common. And there's some things that we do that are all our own. And those things exist in the child's mind for a reason. Guess what that reason is? If you all will think back on that threshold exercise, it really is a powerful exercise. If you'll draw a horizontal line across the page and you say, that's where I cross the line from the ego child's mind into the adult mind, into the higher mind. Everything that's below that line, like blame and even shame, if you will draw a vertical line through that horizontal line, when you cross into the higher realms of experience, it becomes your wisdom, it becomes your contribution, it becomes something of value that you add to the world. Just the way it is. So all of these things that you're so busy vilifying yourself for actually just need to become something else. We're so busy beating ourselves up that we don't go on and discover what we can be. We stay in the fixation, and remember, it's an energy fixation of vilifying ourselves. And because we're so harsh to ourselves, so we have to do things like create fantasy so our world can be better, or we can avoid that thought and cut ourselves off emotionally from ourselves. When that's a natural part of us, we need to get straight with this and just go on and let it become something else that we can do good in the world with. That was terrible grammar, but nevertheless, I think you understand what I'm talking about. So, not only does self-forgiveness break the hold that the past has on you, but the second thing is it allows you to go forward, create a new life, achieve your goals, and add value. It's what we're talking about right now. Self-forgiveness does this. It frees has been trapped in the egoic child's mind. There are certain, you have 4 bodies. You have a mental body. It's what you think with, right? You have an emotional body. It's what you feel with. You have a physical body, is pretty much aware of, right? And you have a spiritual body, which is your energetic body. It is, by the way, all the bodies itself at the time of our physical path. What consciousness is this: we have way too much energy trapped in all of us have way too much energy trapped in the emotional body. Now, what should be in the emotional body? Unconditional love and unconditional love. Awe is an incredible system. Passion, compassion for others. Joy. Do you understand? Forgiveness, by the way. All of these things and more belong there. They have their natural home in our emotional body. Natural is when we overload it with rage at my father, rage at myself, self-blame, self-torture, self-punishment, shame of all sorts of things, right? And it causes us, these things that are trapped in that emotional body, it causes us to leave it an authentic life, because you can't live with those things. You have to address them and play with them and cover them up. And so what happens when what is inappropriately in that emotional body, You're freeing energy. Well, where does that energy go? You know where it goes? It goes into the spiritual energetic body. So you wake up emotionally, you wake up spiritually. You become the spiritual being in physical form with that perspective rather than the emotional being that doesn't get the spiritual body or does for an hour on Sunday morning. We are in the process of becoming more aware spiritually, bigger spiritually, having more energy there so that we can live that life. And that's the authentic life. That's what you've always been. That's all your mental, emotional, physical bodies are anyway, is energy. We fool ourselves thinking it's something else. You've always been a spiritual being in physical form, but we get off the beam in our childhood. We start investing more emotionally because that's our journey, isn't it? Nobody's born to the high spirituality that we're all capable of in our potential. We're not supposed to be. We wouldn't have any wisdom if every day was Christmas morning, right? Yeah. We have to find it for ourselves. It's the sacred journey. It's the spiritual experience of self. And that's what we're doing right now. Self-forgiveness does allow you to go forward in this journey. You see, many people fool themselves and say, I don't deserve God. Guys, stop being so dramatic. There is no deserving. It's built into you. It's who you really are. Now let's address the things that are in the way. That's really what it's about. And then you get to create the life that you want. It's just a working of energy. Go back and listen to my Creating the Life You Want series on Blog Talk Radio. Yeah, it's there. You once you practice self-forgiveness too, there's something between there's a difference between having great ideas that you'd like to act on and actually acting on them. So self-forgiveness provides energy so that you can motivate yourself to go on and do the things you're thinking about and talking about. Number 3, self-forgiveness teaches you to care for yourself in a more wholesome way. I will say, as someone who has probably got more age on herself than you've got on you, really, you've got to have your health. You've got to have your physical health to do everything that you need to do. If you are going to go on this journey and add value, we've got to get you healthy first. Okay? And of course, these emotional burdens do wear us down. The things that we do to ourselves to handle the emotional burdens, like drugs and alcohol and God knows what else, have to be addressed. Because we're all coping the best way we know how. This is not a judgment. This is to say we cope the best way we can until we know more and can cope a different way. So let's learn to cope a different way together. That's all. I think I told a story when we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago that we sometimes take better care of our animals, our pets, than we do ourselves. But why do you think those pets are there for us? They're to show us we're caring for their little hurt thorn in the paw better than ourselves. So we have to get straight with us. We have to, part of realizing and realizing our emotional intelligence and working on it is to realize we don't treat ourselves very well and to learn to treat ourselves better. Number 4, self-forgiveness allows all of us to learn from our mistakes. And this allows for wisdom, and this allows for contribution. And this is the unique value that you have to bring to this world. This is your fulfillment, ultimately, when you do this. So this is the progression. You make a mistake, you learn from it, it becomes your wisdom, it becomes your contribution, because everybody who is in the highest self wants to contribute, believe it or not. It's only the ego child's mind that doesn't want to contribute, that wants it all for them, right? Your contribution is your unique wisdom to bring to the world. Nobody has had your life. Nobody has thought your thoughts, felt your feelings. This is your uniqueness. And ultimately, when you are really expressing that, it becomes very fulfilling, and your ultimate fulfillment of your potential. Very important, okay? All right, now, that's all I wanted to say about self-forgiveness. If you'd like to know more, by all means, listen to the show that we did last week. I found a marvelous quote. Here's the quote. This is by Rebecca O'Dwyer, and my apologies because I don't know who Rebecca O'Dwyer is, but I think a lot of her because this quote is wonderful. The only person we have the right or the power to forgive is ourselves. For everything else, there is the art of acceptance. Now, I love that quote. I shared it with you last week. I think it is an important quote. And here was my point. The art of acceptance. There is an art to self-acceptance. There is. There's an art to accept the way life is. And that's what we're going to talk about that today in a little more detail. So let's talk about what self-acceptance is. And this is on the internet. I believe this was Wikipedia. I thought it was pretty good as a explanation of what self-acceptance even is. Number one, it's the awareness of everyone's strengths and weaknesses. It's the awareness of your strengths and weaknesses. You know, so many of us just want to see our strengths, right? We want to be told that we are great. And it's because we're not self-accepting of the other part of us. I had a client for many years who called it her dark side. Well, you know, just by defining it as your dark side was certainly not self-accepting. That's just silly. We all have the light and dark. We all have the good and bad. We all have the selfish and the petty, and the generous. We all have everything. I mean, if God is everything, and if you are all you are as God, then you have everything. And we don't have the choices to be anything if we're avoiding a good part of this. So we've got to realize ourselves, forgive ourselves, be ourselves as the whole. Only then do you have the choice to be more. Don't you get it? Otherwise, you're reacting and denying things that is your springboard for you to be a better person. It is the thrust we need for you. And instead, we're denying it, so we have no thrust, right? Okay. Number two, according to Wikipedia, it is a realistic yet subjective appraisal of one's talents, capabilities, and general worth. I think realistic is a really important word here, because when we're hurt as kids and we have so little, what do I want to say here? We have so few options back then because we don't have the advanced mind. That doesn't even start occurring until the 20s. We're not realistic. We're trying to avoid reality. We are presuming that reality hurts, because before you're 18 months old, when your body starts developing the ego and the egoic child's mind, all time is now. That means if you are experiencing anything uncomfortable, anything that actually hurts, anything that actually scares you, there's a part of your experience that is saying this is the way life is, this is the way it's always going to be. Is that true? No, that was the experience before we had a time-oriented system. The ego and the ego child's mind comes along to say, this hurt me in the past, so I'm going to scan the future for it. And it doesn't allow us to stay in the moment. Therefore, my only problem is, there are all these marvelous systems. There are systems for self-forgiveness. There are systems for self-acceptance. There are systems for for mindfulness, right? You can't do it well until you address the whole thing. Guys, nobody can. These are part of the advanced consciousness state. This is, I have clients that will come in and say, I don't trust. Turn on my trust. It's like, no, nobody can do that. It's part of the privilege of the deepening of consciousness, where you wake up and realize that you can trust yourself in your God. There you are. And the right human beings when you have discernment. You see how it works? All of this becomes the privilege, becomes these beneficent gifts in deepening consciousness. It's not because God somehow bestows them on you and plunks them on your head. It's because we as human beings open to them, because we're getting through this crap, the ego child's mind that tells us something else. That's all. Okay. So part of our journey is to become comfortable with reality, with the way things really are. We have to them over. That's right. We are in fantasy. Fantasy is its own reward. You'll hear me say that. So you can't create anything out of fantasy. It's not the same thing as visualization. No, fantasy is an unreal state that you choose instead of reality. So we've got to now go on a journey to realize that actually reality is better than fantasy, and we've got to find the gifts in it. If you really important thing, if you find that you're having trouble with this, for you to think of what has upset you in the past, and for you to make a list of all the things you got out of it. Okay? Now, you didn't get anything out of it if it's still active and going on. You got very little out of it. What could you get out of it? A lot more if you weren't busy with the scourge on your back. Number 3. Wikipedia describes the self-acceptance as feelings of satisfaction of one's self, despite and deficiencies. The feelings of satisfaction of oneself, despite deficiencies and regardless of past behavior, or they say choices, forget that word, I say, or reactions. I'm going to read this to you according to me. It is defined as feelings of satisfactions of oneself, despite deficiencies, seeming deficiencies that you tell yourself, and regardless of past behavior or reactions. Now, you understand why I take the word choices out. I think we throw that word around too much. You don't have any choices as an ego child's mind. You have very, if any. They're reactions. They're reactions of the past. I think we ought to forgive those things now and realize that we did the best we could at the time. We coped as best we could. Sometimes they were mistakes. And if they made us feel really bad, you can bet that they were a different energy than the highest self, which is love-based, doing the best it can. The non-acceptance of self is you avoiding, not looking at your true self. You denying who you really are. You say you're bad instead of realizing, oh, you're much more than bad. We're all bad, but you're much more than bad. There are your choices that you can only make when you start this journey and start realizing you have them. You have these wonderful choices. You don't have to follow that script when you, the script that you wrote for yourself when you were a kid. You know, those reactions were a script that led to an inevitable conclusion. And every time you use that script, you get the same conclusion. For example, if you're writing a script saying, I am not enough, I am not pretty enough, I am not smart enough, I am not anything enough, and I am trying to find a partner, it's going to result in the same disappointment with the partner you've always created. Because you're creating out of a false scenario, therefore you get someone, right? Instead of realizing who you are, going on a journey, being in a relationship with yourself, the true self, and attracting someone from that. Now we're talking. So I found an article that said, what is self-acceptance? 25 exercises and definition and quotes. This was by a woman named Courtney E. Ackerman. And I agree with some of the things she says, and but she has a whole system, so who am I to say? But anyway, that's what I'm quoting here off and on, and then telling you what I also think. She says, self-acceptance is not an automatic and default state. Many of us have trouble accepting ourselves as we are. I absolutely agree with that. But here I go. We're talking about accepting reality, right? Accepting the what is of life, because that's a very creative state. Only there can you, if you accept what is, only there can you say, well, how can I educate, add value, make it better for people, make it better for myself by accepting what is. That's a very important statement, but something comes before accepting what is. And that is accepting yourself as what is. Only then can we accept the what is in the world. Well, we resort to drugs and alcohol and fantasy and avoidance, and we have a big system. We default to just distracting ourselves instead of saying, wait a minute, now I got to get straight with me. We've got a lot of coping mechanisms. I'm just only mentioning a few. But they're just repeating the pattern over and over and over. They are causing you to repeat this over and over and over again. And here's the rub. Every single time you use one of these coping strategies, you're convincing yourself you need to use one of these coping strategies. And there's something else. There's something beyond. We've got to come to grips with the what is of us is in reality, and find out that it's actually all a good thing. There's a perfect system here. So instead of avoiding us or avoiding what is, or we've got to accept it. We've got to say, okay, this is the way it is. Do I like it? Not so much. I think I'm going to, what is in my purview to change about this? Is it my attitude? That always helps. Is it doing this or doing that, or developing a different strategy, or finding out from someone who knows more than I do about what to do here? Things to do that we must ask ourselves, and certainly find the answers if they're outside of us, you see? Okay. But everything starts, I will say again, with yourself. That's really important. Okay. This article by Ackerman, Courtney Ackerman, goes on to say that self-acceptance is exactly what the name suggests, the state of complete acceptance of oneself. True self-acceptance is embracing who you are without any qualifications, conditions, or exceptions. I will agree with that. She recommends that you do it, so go out and do it. I say, you can't do that fully until you've started working on yourself and gotten some of these other things in place first. I will say that. I think that's really important. Self-acceptance, she goes on to say, is an individual's acceptance of all his and her attributes, positive and negative. You know, you get to a place in your process of releasing these old negative concepts you have about yourself. Well, you'll walk into my office and you're going to say, I don't care what you find, just find it. And that's wonderful. I'd love to hear that from you. Doesn't matter what you tell me. It can be as a negative or positive. It doesn't matter. Just find it. And let's do this together. Let's get past this and into something else. Okay. So I'm going to go back to what I told you in the very beginning of the show. I think there are things to put in place. So I believe in doing all of this really well. One of the things I've always tried to do, sometimes failed, but tried to do, is serve really well. I want to serve the best I can in the moment. So here's how to do it. We address what you blame yourself for. We address the shame you feel because somewhere in that blame, you've crossed that pathological line and you say, I am bad because of these things. I am. It becomes a self-attack. Let's face it. Let's know what those things are, right? And then comes self-forgiveness for those things, especially for you crossing that line. You see, it ceased to be an act that you did and another act that you did and another act that you did is in the ego child's mind. And it becomes this blame, this shame that we are a horrible person. And we've got to address that to forgive ourselves. That becomes then self-acceptance. I'll take responsibility for having done all of that because I was human. We all are human. This is everybody's journey. It's not just yours. We've all done egregious things. Once we self-accept, something opens in us called self-compassion. And that is that we have a great deal, this is the start of loving oneself. When we say, I get it, I get the humanness of all this. And then I tried very hard the best way I knew how. You did. Okay? And a love starts being born in us. I'll say before you even go on this journey, there's no way. Everybody says, oh, love yourself more. Nobody knows what the hell that is. In fact, if you're in the ego child's mind, you don't even know what love is. So let's just put it on the table. Okay? I was so proud of a client of mine one time when she was choosing, values. When we talk about choosing values, we'll go back around and talk about that in just a minute. And she said, oh, love. I don't know what that is. She says, you're right. I don't know what that is. She chose something else until she got there, right? So self-compassion leads to being so aware of this moment and what you're doing in it in relation to you that a mindfulness is born. And that's extremely important. Mindfulness is just not a switch you can turn on. See, a lot of these programs, which I'm glad they're out there because they're making us think about these things, but you feel like a failure doing them because you can't do them well, you know? And a lot of people are saying, oh, I'm very mindful, when denying and avoiding the self that I'm recommending you go fully into. I'm just not going to think about that. I can't tell you how many people who are on a spiritual path say that to me. I can't be mad. Oh, no, that's not spiritual. And I say, go be damn mad. And then go past it. Go on and fully recognize it's part of you and get on the other side of it. For God's sake, accept the fact that you're capable of rage. Everybody is. Accept it, but go through it and get on the other side of it. They're not supposed to deny it, and you're not supposed to stay in it. So what else is left? Working through it, getting on the other side, finding out how to do that. You see, I think you do. So many people are afraid of won't. Now, don't you be one of those people. Every single thing can be looked at and gotten through. Get far enough, and if you go through it and you learn how to work through things, there won't be anything in life that you're afraid of. Not anymore. You'll realize that even things that you don't like, the death of a loved one, is part of a larger system that gives you such gifts and such wisdom and other ideas that you can help other people with. This is how the world gets better, guys, through you and through knowledge like this that you are accepting. The next thing is, out of this mindfulness comes some sort of service. You need to have ideas of how to help with the information that has come through you. And out of that service then, of service becomes the implementation of that service. And out of the implementation of that service, you begin to start feeling some fulfillment. And you begin to see a light, and it is part of your potential. And you keep going through that, and it becomes a real depth of potential, which becomes real self-fulfillment. And out of that, you will realize, man, I get it. I'm just who I am as the energy of God. Light and dark, good and bad, rich and poor, everything else. And that is your authenticity. You're making choices, and you're seeing gifts in everything. And you know, even if it's something you don't want, you have the power to change what you can and accept the rest and go on and offer this to other people and help in some way. The system's perfect, but the ego child's mind doesn't know that yet. See, the ego child's mind doesn't know of this highest way of being. It's only the higher way of being, the expansive, I'm not the expansive, but the highest self experience that knows of the ego child's mind and how the whole thing works. You see, that's why at some point you've got to take a chance on something more than the ego child's mind tells you. You see? So moving along, Ackerman's advice here is, was this somebody else's quote? No, this is her advice. No, according to therapist Russell Grieger, he wrote that You accept that as a fallible human being, you are less than perfect. You will often perform well, but you will also err at times. You always and unconditionally accept yourself without judgment. If you don't think that's process, kids, we got some talking to do, because that's a process. You don't just throw that on like a light switch unless you are doing it falsely. Now, you can do all of this falsely, right? But that's not what the show's about, because you can also do it well and honestly. And that's what we're talking about here. I thought this was real interesting that Eckerman said. She said, although self-acceptance is closely related to other self-concepts, it is a distinct construct. Now, let's go into that. She says that a close cousin, self-esteem, is also centered on your relationship to yourself, but it differs in an important way. Self-esteem refers to how you feel about yourself, whether you feel you're generally good, worthwhile, and valuable, while self-acceptance is simply acknowledging and accepting that you're who you are. I think that's an important distinction. Seltzer, who she quotes, and I don't know Seltzer, but I like his name, or her name, puts it this way. Whereas self-esteem refers specifically to how valuable or worthwhile we see ourselves, self-acceptance alludes to a far more global affirmation of self. When we're self-accepting, we're able to embrace all facets of ourselves, not just the positive, more esteemable parts. I think that's a really good quote. Now, in this article, she goes on to say that nobody knows a lot about self-acceptance. I don't know why. I think it's one of those nebulous, mysterious, unexplained frontiers. I also think it's primarily energetic. So I don't think the world's very good at that. We're good at, the tangible. I don't think this is that kind of tangible. And I also think it is a part of your process to consciousness. Man, I'm going to tell you, not a lot of people know about that. So, and this is, I think, an aspect of psychology, if psychology is dealing with the here and now, that eludes you, because I think it's primarily energetic. That's my opinion. So, you've got to realize that self-acceptance is about accepting the whole. You can't fake it. It's accepting the whole. Now, I'd like to talk to you about one of the things that I see people get confused, and I've done a construct of my own with this. You might want to get a pen and paper and draw what I'm going to describe. If you draw a line at the bottom of the page, draw a line. And I want you, below that line, I want you to put the egoic experience, or the ego experience. On the left side of the line, I want you to put contractive self. Contractive self. On the other side of the line, I want you to write expansive self. And I'm going to ask you to draw more in just a minute, but right now I'd like to explain what I'm asking you to draw so far. The ego self can, like everything else in life, has a contractive and an expansive side. The contractive side is when somebody hurts your feelings. It's energy that goes in. It's not good or bad. I mean, certainly when somebody hurts your feelings, you would class that as a bad experience. That's in quotes if you're listening on the radio. But it could also be when I bring my cat or dog or husband, not in that order necessarily, into my sphere to give them a kiss and nobody exists but us, right? Okay. So free your mind from the contractive or expansive selves being good or bad. It's just not true. It's just energy going in. Let's go to the expansive side. That's energy going out. How does energy go out? Well, you can be angry at someone and explode. That's energy going out, right? It can also be when you leave a big tip for a waiter who doesn't deserve it because they're having a really bad day. And it makes you feel good. You're being real generous, all right? But it's all about you. Expansive. That ego is all about you. It could be all about you at the of yourself, which makes it's still all about you. But nevertheless, cannot deny is all about you. It's a self-indulgence